Afternoon. This is Mr. Burke, and we're going to go through the Chapter 12, Wireless and Mobile Security. Let's get started. I've highlighted here under the kind of the chapter agenda, the key topics. We're really going to focus in, you can read them all, but we're going to really focus in on wireless technologies, mobile and Bluetooth. Within wireless is Wi-Fi, otherwise known as IEEE 802.11. That is the Wi-Fi protocol or family of protocols, so we'll get into that. Then focus in on wireless attacks, mobile application security, that's your cell phone, and then discussion about mobile device management policies. What do we do if we're in an organization and we have to have rules and policies in place because our users, our students, our customers, our employees are using their own devices, they're sharing devices, they're doing work at home. What rules do we apply to make that work? Let's go. Chart here shows all the key terms. You can read that on your own, but I'll go down kind of by section by going through the technologies, the terms, encryption. We'll get into Bluetooth. We'll get into wireless exploits, mobile attacks, mobile device management, and so on. So this is the flow and the concepts that you'll see under each flow, each category. The key thing we'll say about wireless is the growth in wireless is exponential, exponentially growing up, and it'll continue to go up fast, especially as the cost of and the capabilities of computing, hard drives, and network. They're all faster, cheaper, more dense, more data, more speed, more compute power. Everything is going up, and that is the enabler that allows more mobility, more device, more wireless, more Internet of Things capabilities. All right. So here are the technologies. Know them all, at least for the quiz, at least the definition. But I did highlight the three that we're really going to focus in on as the primary, and that's the Wi-Fi, the 802.11, Bluetooth, which is the low power devices that have to be in very close proximity of another device to work. It's your earbuds and your smart phones and headphones and things like that. NFC, near field communication, it's a wireless technology, but it's primarily used on badges and card readers. I think your Apple payphone, that capability on your phone is an NFC. RFID, another type of radio frequency access. I know that we use it in our beacons, the pods that we have in our cars when we do easy pass and things like that, and it will bounce off of a radio signal and respond back with some authentication capability. Cell, well, that's mobile phones. Let's jump over that. There is some other capabilities, wireless capabilities, something called ZB and Z-Wave. These are used in home automation devices like your telephone, your thermostats, and your bells, ringers, and washing machines, and all these other devices that are now all connected to the internet. Everything's getting connected to the internet. Satellite communication. We're not going to go deep into that, but obviously satellite TV has been, or at least was big, and of course satellite communication is huge within our greater enterprise and world or global economy. Then infrared, that's pretty low end technology. That is your remote TV device and other devices that use light signals to provide signals and controls. A couple key terms for Wi-Fi. There we go. First of all, Wi-Fi. This is the base. This is our laptops and mobile phones, and this is when you connect to the Wi-Fi network at Starbucks or in the dormitory or in the school of business or wherever you are. You're using Wi-Fi, and the protocol that's supporting you is 802.11. That is the standard. Now, there's a whole family of protocols under that that get improved and more secure and faster, more bandwidth. We're not going to go deep into that. I think in the backup charts are some information if you want to look at it. But effectively saying if it's 802.11, it is what we use the term Wi-Fi for. Within the Wi-Fi family, there are a couple of key identifiers. First, if you have a Wi-Fi network and think of your home, you will have an SSID. This is the name you give to your Wi-Fi network when you set it up. So out of the box, it might be called, Netgear, Linksys, or something like that. You might say, I'm going to call it my Wi-Fi or Bob's Wi-Fi. But you provide a name and give a name to your Wi-Fi network, and that's what starts to beacon out when people are searching for Wi-Fi networks. The name of your network, if turned on, will be part of that beacon, that signal. Next is the ESSID. This is the Extended Basic Service Set. And here's a classic example. It's where you have SSIDs that are used in multiple access points, are used across an enterprise. For example, in the School of Business, we may have something called guest Wi-Fi. Guest Wi-Fi. Well, it's not one device in the building. There may be tens of dozens of devices in the building that you can connect to depending upon what floor you're on or what column you're in, what room you're in, or whatever. So that's where the SSID is a common SSID, and it's used across many, many different access points, and it could be in many different buildings. It becomes an enterprise SSID. Then finally, the BSSID. This is the MAC address for the device. This is that 16-character MAC address, but it is set by the manufacturer. It is unique. It is unique. Whereas the SSID and ESSID, those are names that you give, and they can be redundant, used multiple times. The BSSID is always unique. Okay. Now, these data terms are used when identifying networks and connections to networks and devices that are connecting to the networks. These are the key indicators, like their fingerprint, their serial numbers, when they connect and what they're connecting to. Continuing on, let's get into encryption modes. Again, Wi-Fi is the 802.11 protocol. Initially, the first protocol to come out, and it's probably been a good 20 or more years, is WEP, Wired Equivalent Privacy. It was great at the time. It has since been retired. This is what happens with ciphers or encryption mods. Improvements come along, the bad guys get smarter, and WEP has been determined to be vulnerable to attacks. Now, it's still pretty good, but a sophisticated hacker knows how to hack into WEP. They have tools and password guessing tools that allow them to break in. So from that came WPA, Wi-Fi Protected Access. This is where an additional key, a temporal key integrity, TKIP, is used. So when encryption is set, you use a new key for every data packet. So it is not the same key being used over and over as data packets go back and forth in the wireless network. The WPA applies kind of a rotation of keys, changing of keys, to make it even more difficult and challenging to decode or to break into. A variation of that was WPA2, pre-shared key. Here is where you connect, but you have a common passcode that everybody uses, and then you have a very secure, fairly secure environment. The thing with PSK is that initial password that could get compromised. If somebody gets the password, your encryption could be great, but they're already beyond the gate. They're inside the walls. So another outgrowth of that, depending upon your enterprise, you could use EAP, Enterprise Access. And this is where you authenticate not by a common passcode, but you use your actual username and password. You have an enrolled username and password that has to be used. Now that data is sent to a server called Radius. And Radius is an authentication, a username and password authentication service. Radius can be used for Wi-Fi. It can be used for all kinds of remote access capabilities, but in this case, it is used to maintain the Wi-Fi user and password information. Finally, initialization vector, IV. When setting up your keys for Wi-Fi transmission, IV will generate a random string of characters, random numbers that are added to your encryption key to make it even more obscure. So it's created, and this is a one-time set of numbers, and then every time you reconnect, you will randomly create another set of numbers. So it makes it even more difficult to decipher where's the key versus what's random data, filler data. It's like salt used in hashing. Okay. And I think one of the key items is, and an IV is only used once, so it's constantly changing. Okay. Here are a couple of vulnerabilities. We're going to hit these a couple of different ways, but a wireless network, especially if there's a common passcode, a dictionary attack. Frequently that password is not strong. So a dictionary attack is when a tool is used to try just about any combination of passwords, known passwords, compromised passwords to see if they can break in. So that's what we call a brute force attack, using a word list or a dictionary as the source. Okay. There's locational items, obviously with wireless, your proximity, your physical proximity may make it easier or available for somebody to break in and access your device if they're on the same floor, in the same room, in the same building, above or below you. That allows them to also eavesdrop. They could hijack your channel. You connect to a channel. They also then somehow, some way find a way to grab that channel away from you and basically eavesdrop on your data transmissions, your connection, or use your connection, and so on. But physical proximity allows the bad guys to get next to you, to get around you, and either steal your signal, get in the middle of your signal, masquerade as though they're you, and so on. All right, so here's some examples. We've talked about these before. I'm going to go to the next chart and go down through them real quickly, but first of all, piggybacking, this is when somebody's not authorized to get on the Wi-Fi network. Comes in without permission. It's like sneaking in the door without using a key. War driving is when somebody literally drives around or walks around and they're looking for open Wi-Fi networks. So regardless of where you are or where they are, they put an antenna up and they're trying to find if there's an open network, and that's just the first step of a reconnaissance, potentially an attack. Evil twin attack is where a bad guy will put up a fake Wi-Fi access point. Looks like a real one, but it then routes that user to a fake network. So in the building, you may think, oh, I see Howard Wi-Fi. You connect to Howard Wi-Fi or Starbucks Wi-Fi or McDonald's Wi-Fi, and then unbeknownst to you, they send you to some other website or to something they want you to access, and maybe ask you for your user ID and password, a way to steal your credentials. That's an evil twin. In the wireless space, the capability to sniff, which means basically put an antenna up and just kind of read the data that's flowing back and forth in the air. And if you get the right data, you could potentially do a replay attack. If I can grab data that seems to be meaningful, like you entering your username and password credentials, I then can replay that later in the air and maybe masquerade as though I'm you. A rogue access point is similar to an evil twin, but in this case, you're putting an access point up in a space that doesn't belong, that is not part of the organization. Victims will connect to your access point thinking you're legitimate, and you will pass them to the legitimate network, but now you're in the middle. So you're able to eavesdrop and sniff the activity going back and forth between the victim and their authorized network. And then jamming in this configuration, you can read that for yourself. That's where you're causing trouble or taking advantage of poor configuration setups. All right, in the wireless space, here's some tools, by the way, if you're trying to scan and find wireless devices or find out if you have a BSSID or an SSID or something, and you find out where that belongs, there is a portal called WiggleNet. If you have some information, you can put it in there. It'll tell you where that SSID network or that BSSID access point might be, and it's using publicly available information records to determine where those devices last were. Then cracking passwords, number 3, there are tools, air cracking and Hashcat are 2 of the more popular tools. They run in the Linux environment. You can look those up on Google. All right, security measures. Always assume if you're in Wi-Fi, it's a public network. Never assume it's secure. So don't send any sensitive, classified, top secret information in Starbucks over a Wi-Fi network. Always encrypt your data. Make sure you're using long-run credentials and passwords. And if your passwords are default passwords and default credentials, make sure you change them and use set up strong passwords and credentials. You can disable the broadcasting of your SSID. If your SSID is Jim's Wi-Fi, there's a way for you not to broadcast that. It's still accessible, but you don't necessarily want it showing up when people put their antenna up. So you can disable the broadcasting of your SSID. Okay, and the rest you can see are pretty straightforward. Mac filter says, hey, set your Wi-Fi up that only certain devices can connect. Use firewalls and intrusion detection capabilities, and make sure you're doing your security updates and your antivirus. The next set of charts just is a schematic showing some of the terms and where they are in the landscape, like wireless host, the base station, which are your access points, the actual wireless links, that's the radio waves, and then infrastructure mode. Infrastructure mode essentially means that your base device, your access point you're going to, is then connected to the internet or to other networks. So it will take you into a bigger network or into the wider public network. Ad hoc mode is where your wireless devices are talking to each other directly, sending signals directly without any access point in between. Earlier, we talked about 802.11. Don't need to go through this, but this shows you the family of 802.11 protocols as they continue to improve and go up the food chain. The speed of these protocols are improving. Okay, Bluetooth. Just showing you a couple of examples. You know what Bluetooth is, but there are a couple of attacks. Bluejacking, which is sending some unsolicited messaging. Blue snarfing is getting unauthorized access to a Bluetooth device. Bugging is listening in on a Bluetooth transmission, and a Bluetooth DOS, or denial of service, is basically disrupting Bluetooth traffic, jamming the signals. Okay. Now we're into mobile devices. You can read some of these charts yourself. I'd like to go right on into well, the security concerns are pretty much the same as you'll see as any device and user. For just about everybody, they're using their mobile device not only for phone, but they're using a smart device that has some type of internet network capability, connections and capabilities. So they need to protect not only access to their device, but they need to make sure they're not leaking data, they're not using unencrypted linkages. They have good passwords, and they keep their software and their operating systems up to date, patched. Here are a couple of terms that you might see in mobile. Jailbreaking is where you get in on a device, a mobile device, and you escalate your privilege. You bypass the operating system. You basically break into the phone. This was frequently seen when people were trying to use black market phones on different types of cell networks. They had to jailbreak them to get them compatible with, a Sprint phone can run on Verizon and so on. Rooting, similar to jailbreaking, it's where you get into the operating system and take controls that are normally bypassed or not available to a user. Side loading, this is where data or applications are loaded onto your device that don't come through the authenticated or the official source like the App Store. So it's putting applications in that don't necessarily or not necessarily approved to be put on your device. And then tethering, quick way to describe that is it's like using a hotspot. It's where you cozy up near a device that does have access and you connect to their device and get access to the network by tethering, with or without their knowledge. Now we're finally into device management, mobile device management. This is where an organization needs to have control over their employees' use, their students' use, faculty use, whoever. If they're using devices and connecting to their enterprise network, they need to have some rules in place for how we're going to manage the mobile devices if they're allowed to access. And you can see some of the policy examples that may be put in place. How are passwords handled? Automatic wiping of data, where if the device gets out of range or is reported stolen, immediately and automatically purge all data on the hard drive. Where can apps be downloaded from? Do they have to go to an app store? When are patches and antivirus capabilities supplied? For example, every Tuesday, your device may wake up and automatically, with or without your permission, just do an operating system update if there's a patch available. Oftentimes, organizations want to make sure if you have a device, you are fully encrypted, including your hard drive. So somebody can't come along and steal your hard drive and everything. And you can read the final content management and geofencing, which essentially says, let this device only be active if it's within a certain range or in a certain location. So if a device moves outside the DC area or beyond 50 miles, take it off the network. Automatically wipe the data, report it stolen, whatever. Now, in device management, there are deployment modes, and here's where employees and users and students and faculty, there's a strong preference that they do not want to walk around with multiple devices. They'd rather be able to do everything on the same device or as few devices as possible. So a couple of deployment models is allow the employer or the user to choose their own device. We'll either give you one provided by the organization or you can use your own. Then there's COPE, which is where it's issued by the company. You can do your personal business on the device. That's permitted. COBO, corporate owned, business only, that's where what it sounds like. Company gives it to you, but you can only do business on the device. And I will say that is the most secure. That is by far, but it's the most disruptive. It probably has the lowest employee morale. BYOD is where you just tell the device, tell the employee, the user, the student, bring your own device and we'll connect you with. That might be one of the least secure because the organization has no idea what you're bringing. Are you doing antivirus? Are you doing the patching? Do you have anybody in your household that has access to this? Are the passwords strong? All those kind of things. So BYOD is where we tend to focus in, especially on how we're going to manage the disadvantages. What about personal use? What is the employer, the individual, you doing on that device that might be disruptive to the organization and to the data within the organization? Ownership. If there's data from the organization that leaks out onto their device, who owns it? Support, antivirus, and patch management we talked about. And then there's a whole bunch of issues about privacy and legal. If data's on their device, does the organization have the right and the authority, if you will, to confiscate the device, to inspect the device, to make demands on regarding anything related to the device? So BYOD, and earlier we saw all those policies. This is where those policies really are important. That, hey, you can bring your own device, but we'll put it under, and device management, and it'll have to have a strong password. It'll have to have encryption turned on. It'll have to have antivirus. It'll have to have patch management running. It'll have to have some capability to auto wipe the hard drive if something happens. So those kind of policies may be required, even if the employee or the user or the student brings their own device. With that, we are done with the primary charts. Contact me if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next video.